We're also getting new jobless claim numbers, and what are they saying?
These numbers are showing some resilience as well. 230,000 first-time claims. So these are people who are going to their unemployment office for the very first time, filing for unemployment benefits. This is down 16,000 from the prior week. And let me give you some perspective. In the decade before the pandemic, the average was 311,000 every week. So this is still historically pretty low. With all of those headlines every day of, we're in the middle of job cuts from 3M and from Disney and from here and from there. When you look at these numbers, it's still a pretty strong job market.
That strong job market is feeling good for all of us to a certain extent, all of us except for the Federal Reserve, apparently. Their officials are trying to tamp down inflation without causing a recession, although part of me feels like as an American, it's like a every decade thing, so. But anyway, how different is the wage growth here? Well, this per the New York Times. Wages and salaries for private sector US workers were up 5.1% in March from a year earlier and up 1.2% from December. That was the same growth rate as in December and defied forecasters' expectations of the modest slowdown. So, you have to ask yourself, why would this upset the feds? Here's your answer. Policymakers believe that the labor market, in which there are far more available jobs and workers to fill them, is pushing up pay at an unsustainable rate, contributing to inflation. They are trying to strike a delicate balance, raising borrowing costs enough to discourage hiring and ease pressure on pay, but not so much that companies begin laying off workers en masse. Which is kind of interesting, as we know that the 1% always manages to get their big payday, and we aren't really necessarily being paid enough because there are so many costs and expenses out there, and our wages are the only thing that haven't really been going up. But the results of the effort seem to be mixed in reviews. So here are three results in particular, or at least four, I guess. Inflation has come down from its high last year. Economic growth has slowed. Companies have begun posting fewer job openings. Housing and tech sectors have cooled down. Fed officials worry that if companies need to keep raising pay, they will also need to keep raising prices. That could make it hard for inflation to return to the central bank's target of 2% per year, even as the pandemic era disruptions that caused the initial pop of inflation receded. That's really interesting because I don't necessarily think that's the case. If anything, that's how our system is somewhat structured, yes, but it doesn't have to be the case. I definitely got to ask you, Mondale, does that seem right to you, or?
It's so funny that the Fed is upset or even bothered that wages are going up to keep up with inflation. We know that this does not have to be the case. You're absolutely right. Our system is structured that we don't complain about CEOs and executives making 21 times what the workers make, but we blame workers' salary on prices going up. They don't have to do that. Their companies are getting record number profits quarter after quarter. So what we can do is we can say, listen, if you're raising your prices while your CEO is maintaining their pay, then there should be something done that is costing, that we're blaming workers for inflation. You don't have to tax workers or slow down hiring. We want to slow down hiring, really? So we're saying a set of Americans need to be unemployed in order to keep this system in place. That sounds like a broken system to me. There should never be a time where the feds are discouraging companies to hire. And if people hear that and say it out loud, they should be bothered that we're not challenging CEOs to cut back on their golden parachutes when they leave companies, while they're at companies, and say, listen, if you're creating resources for companies, then you should be paid better, not CEOs who sit in offices and ride, golden jets.
Exactly. And the fact is that there are so many people out there who are still struggling. And I do get the thought that we should celebrate the fact that wages are up. Representative Jayapal, she took to Twitter really to boost the benefits, tweeted out this: unemployment is down, wages are up, Bidenomics is working. And generally, I don't like any president's name tied to anomics, but that's because the person who first did it is just not my ugh. Anyway, but the reality is that we're still out here struggling. Look at this headline here. It really says it all. 73% of millennials are living paycheck to paycheck, new report finds. By the way, the average millennial now is 40 years old. So it's we're not young bucks out here on the street. We are kind of at the age where generally you'd like to have a family, you'd like to have a house, you'd like to have a car. Maybe you'd like to put food in the refrigerator. I don't want to get wild here, but it's kind of we're struggling. So clearly wages aren't doing it in terms of the rise that we've gotten, what little rise. Meanwhile, we know that young adults and Gen Z are showing signs of strain as well. Check this out from CNBC. As of March, 66% of Gen Zers were living paycheck to paycheck, up from 58% a year ago. Many in this group are earlier in their careers, which mean less earning potential and a greater susceptibility to layoffs. This is the prequel to some kind of Hunger Games stuff. I'm trying to tell you, like the thought that, wages are up. Well, wages were like beneath down before. So why am I gonna pat you on the back and then to have the Fed Reserve be up here all up in arms of, they can't go too high. Guess what? They ain't where they should be to begin with. This is a problem, and it's not a concern on the fact of how high the wages are. It's by virtue of the fact of how messed up our system is. Mondale, any closing thoughts?
No, I think you're absolutely right. The fact that we are knowing that these two generations are the largest generation in the history of this country, and now more than 80 million of them are living in poverty or living paycheck to paycheck. This is unnecessary stress, and the idea that we're bragging about Bidenomics, whatever that is, as working until we match our wages to where they've been. I mean, we haven't had a raise. American workers haven't had a raise since the 70s. So this idea that is up 5% really isn't a raise when inflation was about the same thing. So what we're doing is this is false advertisement as it pertains to where the workers are. People in this country are hungrier now than they were in the 70s, and that is sad. That is a sad state to what is called the strongest economy in the world.
Absolutely. And so for any millennials out there, my best advice is to hitch your cart to some kind of boomer, because I'm sure they got great pensions or whatever. If you got to go down the aisle to get that married on or whatever it is, because that's the only way you're going to survive.